Today we're going to talk about things that shook the world but then were forgotten. Not things that were stolen or thrown away by someone's mom. I'm talking about inventions that could have changed the course of history but were strangely destroyed or made to disappear. Our first invention is the Stirling engine. No, Stirling isn't a car, it's an engine, a heat engine invented by Robert Stirling in the 19th century. This engine worked based on the temperature difference between 2 points. For example, if one side was hot and the other side was cold, the engine would start working silently, cleanly, without smoke or combustion, and without needing gasoline or oil. Back then, everyone said, "Oh wow, this is the peak of technology." But then what happened? The steam engine arrived with its powerful chugging, and that changed everything. And after that, then internal combustion engines came along, and with their humming sound, they put an end to the Stirling engine. But now engineers are going back to it again. Why? Because they've realized that air pollution isn't a good thing. Once again, this victim of history, the electric car from the 1990s. Yes, you heard that right. In 1996, General Motors introduced the electric car EV1. It had everything. Futuristic design, acceptable range, no smoke or smell of gasoline. People had fallen in love with it. But one morning, everyone saw that GM was taking these cars back. Not because of any breakdown or technical issue, just because supposedly oil companies and big lobbyists didn't want it. Cars that didn't use fossil fuels couldn't be allowed to succeed. The electric cars were destroyed. But people's love for it remained, until a guy named Elon came along and said, "I am Tesla." The invention of the registered image telegraph, basically the fax, but for the 19th century. Yes, you heard right. You think fax is something from the 1980s or 90s? No, the first fax was invented in 1843. A man named Alexander Bain from Scotland came along and said, "Why just send messages by telegraph? Let's send images too." At a time when people were still sending messages with smoke signals and carrier pigeons, this guy was suggesting sending images. Naturally, people dismissed him, called him crazy, and threw him out. Years later, fax became a serious thing, but by then it was too late. That original invention was both ignored and lost. The fourth invention, Joseph Lister's antiseptic soap and disinfectant. Now, when we wash our hands, we say, "Wow, what a clean feeling." But there was a time when doctors, with the same hands they used to dissect animal carcasses, would go deliver babies. Until a doctor named Joseph Lister came along and said, "Guys, we're killing people with our dirty hands." It was really disgraceful, so he invented soap and disinfectant. The result? Everyone said, "What is this? Pointless. He's just one of those obsessive types." Even he himself, after a few years, was forced to step aside due to social pressure. But now a hospital without disinfectants is unthinkable. Disinfectant was the fifth invention, the lightweight steam engine, or the super machine of the century. In 1769, a man named Nicolas Joseph Cugnot invented something that, if it had caught on, maybe gasoline cars wouldn't exist today. He built a vehicle with a steam engine that could move on its own. It was almost like a tank, but designed to carry war cannons, a brilliant idea. But because it was very heavy and slow and didn't have a proper brake, it crashed in the middle of a test demonstration into a wall of grain. People said, "What even is this machine? We're not crazy." So what happened? It was set aside and ended up in a museum. But that very steam-powered vehicle became the foundation for today's cars. It's a shame it was overlooked back then. The sixth invention, the cancer vaccine, and the suspicious story behind it in the 1990s. A research team announced that they had managed to produce a vaccine for a specific type of cancer using genetic engineering. The initial tests were successful and everything seemed promising, but suddenly everything went quiet. No news, no follow-up, no mass production, nothing. Some say the project was buried because of pressure from big pharmaceutical companies whose profits came from chemotherapy. No one really knows what happened. Just know that maybe one of humanity's greatest hopes was destroyed just like that, simply because it wasn't profitable. Of course, I should mention that this is based on speculations raised in various scientific articles and media reports. No definitive evidence has ever been published about the deliberate halt of this project. Our seventh invention is the green electric car. A British engineer built an electric car in 1889 that ran without smoke, noise, or gasoline. Truly green and clean. But because it was slower than a horse, had no charger, and there were no charging stations, it failed. It's true that decades later we returned to the same idea, but at that time, no one paid any attention. The ninth invention is a truly silent airplane, an experiment followed by silence when it was showcased at the aviation exhibition. Everyone was left stunned because not only was it silent, but its fuel consumption was also extremely low. What does that mean? It means the destruction of a huge market for hard parts. So what happened to the silent plane? The project was shelved. Why? They said it wasn't ready yet, but many said it was because it went against the interests of the major aviation companies. The 10th invention, smart mirrors that predict diseases. This is no longer science fiction, it's real. In 2015, a Japanese startup designed a mirror that, by analyzing your face, could detect signs of illness even before a doctor could diagnose them. It could tell how much sleep you were missing, how much moisture your skin had, whether your eyes were tired or not, and even detect subtle changes in your skin color that could be signs of liver disease. It made a lot of noise for a few months, but after that, it was destroyed. The company announced that the investor had pulled out and they could no longer afford to continue. Or did they really not want something like this to be in people's hands? The 11th invention, permanent memory, or as it's called, forbidden forgetting. A Canadian company claimed in 2011 that it had developed a technology capable of storing human memories on a chip. The plan was to use special nanochips to copy information from the brain so that if your memory was damaged, it could be reloaded again, like a flash drive for memories. One of the engineers even claimed that they were able to reconstruct a childhood birthday memory with the help of this chip, but suddenly everything stopped. The company's website was deleted. People disappeared, or better to say, they retired, and no one ever talked about it again. Maybe because if people don't forget, the market for Alzheimer's and psychiatric drugs would take a hit. Who knows? The invention of molecular 3D printers, or so-called printed food. An American startup with NASA's support had built a kind of 3D printer that could create food by combining molecular ingredients, including things like hamburgers, chocolate, and pizza without any cooking. Their goal was to use it in space for astronauts. But then they said they wanted to make it for home use too. What does that mean? It means there would be no more need for restaurants, stores, supermarkets, or even cooks. But a while later, you guessed it right, the project was shut down. They said it still wasn't ready for public use. But some media outlets reported that several big food companies sent warnings and threatened to sue. Because, well, if you can make food yourself with a printer, who's going to buy ready-made sauces anymore? For example, the invention of Sism, a game that was more real than life itself, a kind of experience you wouldn't want to repeat. In 2020, an independent game development team created a game called Reflex Reality, which used virtual reality to simulate all your senses. Not just seeing and hearing, but also touch, taste, and smell. You could be in the middle of a war. You could feel the scent of wet earth, or sit in a coffee shop and actually experience the taste of a coffee you didn't really have. But there was a problem. Some players didn't want to leave the game anymore. The real world had become boring for them, so the project was halted and the mental health organization issued a warning. The company said it only wanted to use this technology for therapy, and since then, Reflect Reality became like a legend circulating on YouTube and Reddit, but no one ever saw the game again. The 14th invention is the water-to-fuel converter machine. In one of the South American countries, an engineer named Carlos built a device that could separate hydrogen from water and use it to produce fuel. That means you could hook your car up to a water hose, fill it up, and drive off. The news spread, a few reporters saw it and recorded videos, but a few weeks later, that engineer was killed in a suspicious car accident, his workshop was set on fire, and his device was destroyed. What's even more interesting is that no major company was willing to talk about it. Maybe because if gasoline became free, the entire oil industry would have to shut down. Well, friends, these were some of the mind-blowing inventions that could have changed the world, but suddenly disappeared. Now the question is, were these really destroyed? Was it because they weren't ready? Or was it that some people didn't want the world to change like this? If you've stayed with me so far, be sure to follow us and let us know in the comments which of these inventions amazed you the most. I recommend you keep an open mind and remember that reality isn't always just what we see. So, until the next podcast, goodbye.